Okay, so this week we're moving into the table poker elements. We kind of got cut off by Zoom last week. It just sort of happened pretty quickly while getting to the end of the universal elements. There's just a few things I wanted to touch on before moving into this week, while potentially waiting on some people to come in and join this meeting. So towards the end of the universal elements, Tommy talked a bunch about fears and moving up and going pro and kind of what that entails. And just the importance of that. Um, we're always going to have fears when we move up to new territories. There's going to be new emotions, and these emotions can be helpful and harmful. There's basically, we're just going to have to recognize that this is going to be part of the game and that we're going to have to embrace these things and be aware of them. Really, the only way to go pro or really kind of to test your mettle is to try, is a lot of what the context of Tommy says towards the end. It's really important to, if you want to go pro, you have to actually try out to do it. And so he wraps up all of the universal elements, talking about just sort of the object of the game. And kind of like the general object of the game is to make more money than you initially sat down. Yeah, it's kind of like a universal thing. That's kind of how you determine whether you won or lost during a session, right? But we can always create our own objectives. A failed shot, if we try to move up and lose some money, if long as we play within our own objectives, play well, don't play scared. I mean, that can be sort of like a mini objective for that session that we can feel happy that we accomplished if we did play well. So there's no harm in setting mini objective goals. We don't always have to be looking to make more than we sat down with. There's just kind of, this element of just trying and recognizing that things are going to be fearful and hard and difficult sometimes, but there's a lot more to poker that, we can still enjoy if we don't always look at it through this sort of negative lens. So that concludes all of the summary of the universal poker. So kind of moving into some of the table poker elements, Tommy breaks it down into sort of 4 different areas. The first being information, and then the next being proper mechanics, and then it's after the betting, or what you'd consider 6th Street, and then the poker room itself. So this is all table poker, and that's, what Tommy considers live poker. So we get into a little bit of elements of online poker later on, but this is all within the context of essentially live poker, played with cards, chips, other people face to face, and primarily within a casino setting, as we'll talk about a little bit later on. So the first thing, moving into sort of information, and this is where Tommy uses reciprocality again, which is really important. Information reciprocality is the information war that we're in. Everything, Tommy declares, it's one of the elements, is a tell, basically, right? How everything they do, what they look like, how they sit down, how they move their hands, how they bet their chips, what they say, it can all be used to garner information about that player. It's all information. And so we're consequently always on the lookout for information like that, whether consciously or subconsciously. And also, we're also always giving off that information as well, too. And as a discussion point, one of the first things is, do you think high EQ people have basically better sense of, what they're reading in others and what they're giving off? Personally, I think I am the kind of person who can judge a book by its cover pretty quickly. If I see someone, I can sum them up reasonably quickly. And I feel like for the most part, I'm pretty accurate about that. I think a lot of our kind of outward appearance is, a reflection of our internal sort of thoughts. So that can help out on some level at the poker table, kind of judging a person kind of quickly, maybe seeing sort of very quickly whether you think they're more aggressive or passive or how they may think about things. Realistically, though, I'm trying to kind of move away from that. I realize that, I can't actually see inside people's heads and the stories that people always tell and create for lines. Online poker's kind of proved that through mass data analysis, we can't always know what the story is. And sometimes people do stuff that is far outside of why we can even fathom. And so we should kind of maybe rely a little bit less on this, or at least our confidence in this. Now, it's kind of tough to tell that to someone who's primarily like a field-based player, but I think there's maybe somewhat of an over reliance on sort of reading others and taking all these little tells into account. But conversely, though, I do think that we can give off a ton of information to both the observant and the non-observant. So Tommy talks a bit about that, how to give off less information. He has kind of different strategies for where we give information away. Our faces, our hands, our breathing. These can all be sort of patterns that are, just very, very honest if we're not kind of, keeping track of what our body is doing. I think, for example, there's just been times where you can just feel your heart racing, right? And, your neck, your pulse is just like throbbing when you're playing, if you're pulling something off and you don't have a lot of experience doing something like that. And you feel like you're an open book in those circumstances. And, all you can do is, do your best in your head is just tell your body to play it cool. So we're always leaking information, and the book definitely has some really nice elements to consider how to do that better. But one of the most important things that is sort of obvious when it comes to other like sports or maybe just kind of lifestyle and mindset, but wasn't really obvious about poker is we just need to kind of like get set. Getting set is a great way. You think about it before a baseball player goes to bat, or a tennis player serves. There's these routines where players have to get themselves in the proper zone. And poker is this long kind of continuous process where most people aren't really kind of getting set, right? They are out there just playing, and in between hands or looking around, and, long sessions, it's tough to stay sharp. So Tommy definitely has some recommendations here for getting set, and everyone's routines can be different, but just like a general idea, how do you think you would get set in a live poker setting? You'd probably sit up, you'd stop talking, you'd kind of notice your own breath and your own internal compass of how antsy you are your like feet moving around? Are you calm or collected? Are you paying attention at all? So another way to then keep staying set is you just start looking around the table, just start making observations about other players or stacks. You watch the cards being dealt. You do these little things to really focus on the hand as it's beginning and as it comes through. And it's extremely difficult to actually train our minds to do this over time. I think it's really important that Tommy points this out, that this is a challenge even for highly experienced players. He says basically at the end, he has a one chip challenge where if you can get set, and the last thing you do is get set, is you kind of just move your chip marker or a chip from one pile to the next, or move it slightly. And you should always do that as a culmination of getting set. If you can do that for an entire session or even like an hour or so, it's almost a superhuman level of concentration and getting set. So can't be understated enough that keeping our mindset healthy through all these hands is really important, and getting set is a huge part of that. That's a nice, important element of poker for sure. Um, Tommy talks about sort of table presence and participation after that, kind of how to properly check and fold and how you should be doing some of these things. Um, the kind of general gist of a lot of these things is you want to have good manners in a lot of them. There's kind of like proper ways to do things. And there's, it's not just good manners, but sometimes you can do things that are disruptive to both other players, and, they kill your actual self in the information war. You give away too much information. Like folding out a turn can be a really horrible one, where that can convey a lot of information. Maybe another player was going to call or fold or raise or do a different action, and they can see that you're going to fold out a turn because you're like flummoxed that you missed your draw or something like that. And it's a horrible information leak, right? And it's not fair to other players to do stuff like that. Maybe the other guy really wanted some calls, and you just kind of blew the information or blew the chance for that. So there are always like a really appropriate ways to fold and do these things. Tommy believes that the best way to kind of keep your cool is do something called mum poker, MUM. And that's basically where we're very stoic. We kind of slow down. We're reactionless in a way. It's very hard to act without reaction. It's extremely challenging. Most of the time people are just going to have to ignore instead of be reactionless, like when we're taking in this information. So we can do this mum poker with a lot of effort, and it's a challenging thing. We don't really talk about hands. We're not kind of being jovial in a poker sense. We're just kind of there at the table trying to keep our cool as much as possible, not leak information. I have a question for other players. I mean, I think mum poker players are just kind of terrible. I mean, what kind of player they are. But me personally, when I go to a casino, online poker is more of my bread and butter. So when I go to a casino, it's to be social and it's to kick back and enjoy. And mum poker players are generally what I would consider kind of, bad for the game. If someone's new coming in and, the guy to their left or right just never says anything poker related and doesn't really do anything, it doesn't seem like it's a very lively thing. If you're invited to home games where there's a lot of action or you're just playing with friends or anything like that, you can't go and sit around with a bunch of your buddies and just, all right, I'm just going to be, quiet and stoic for the next like couple hours while we play. So I think mum poker has its place for sure, but I don't know if it's always appropriate. So I thought that was kind of interesting as an element of poker. Maybe that's not always something to strive for, even though you should have that ability within your game. So moving on, there's just some other things. I don't want to give away all the elements here, but there's a really important ways to kind of like show down. That Tommy talks about how to slow fold and fast fold, how to sort of like fast muck and fast roll and everything like that. And there's a time and a place for all these things, although there's essentially never a place for a slow roll. Slow rolls, they may happen a lot more than you ever think, but their intent should always be accidental. It should never be, you shouldn't be intentionally trying to slow roll someone. It's just bad for the game. May get you bad action later, or just that person may never want to play again with you. There's just a lot of reasons why kind of pissing someone off with a slow roll isn't appropriate, but something like a fast fold is extremely appropriate. Keeps the action of the game going. If you're out of turn basically, and you're folding and someone else is going to show, this and that, just get your cards in the muck, let it go, move on to the next hand. It doesn't matter that much. When it comes to all of this, Tommy also talks about bluffing and showing bluffs. And, Tommy believes a bluff is basically a secret that we couldn't keep. And the best thing when you're bluffing is just to plan immediately to throw your cards in the muck. And that's probably a great rule of thumb. That is probably a tremendous rule of thumb. For the whole, it's going to keep more information on your side, right? Unless you're a player who really needs to show someone else, or there's some tremendous history, or just whatever reason. It's always like an ego thing that we really want to, it's a secret we can't keep. We just want to show, and get that like, oh, wow, what a bluff. We can't put it to bed. There's not usually a lot more benefit than that. I'll tell a story though, conversely, about Tom Dwan talking about how he was sort of giving action or getting action in some high stakes games in Macau, I believe. And they're playing short deck. And at the time, Tom made some raise on the turn with short deck that basically committed, 80% of his stack or something like that. And he had some draw that then binked on the river, but he still bluffed with, like a 6 of his pot yet. And it was a huge bluff. I think it was over like $1 million at the time, but relatively to stack to pot ratios and everything like that, the person he was playing against, folded. Tom scoops a tremendous pot, shows his bluff. And then, he said he like made many more times over just by showing that he like peeved off this person and got away with it, an extremely sneaky bluff. So there may be times where, yeah, showing a bluff is great. You may get tremendous more action, but for the most part, I think that will be through way more experience and way more kind of like high level, when it's knowing to do something like that appropriately, instead of just, you're at a casino and you're doing it all the time. Like, just keep it to yourself. Um, so that's kind of like part of the manners. Tommy talks a bit more about manners as we get into this section. How to talk to dealers, how to call the floor. This book, it sort of, through these chapters became like a major aha realization to me, because I've been playing poker now like for decades, basically. Certainly over 15 years in card rooms and such, since turning 21. So a lot of this stuff was kind of like, oh man, I've already been in these games. I've already kind of seen this stuff. I already know, some of it, how people should react and everything like that. And so the things I was getting from this book it didn't really click on me, like what a majorly incredible book this would be to give to someone at the start of their poker career, right? It seems like there would be so much value to having this stuff and knowing some of this stuff beforehand when you're just beginning, especially if you're going to like casinos for the first time. If you're sitting around playing cards with a bunch of your friends, like you don't need to know correctly how to show the floor, call the floor, or, maybe you can do some things that are just whatever, a little bit sillier or whatever. The manners may not matter as much when you're hanging out with your friends, but what a majorly important book this would be for learning all about kind of poker at the start of your career. Was a major aha moment. It seems so simple now, but it was kind of a major aha moment while reading through these chapters. In particular, I'm sure there are many, many elements in here that would have been particularly valuable to know beforehand. For me, some of it was kind of like the betting cues and how to present our chip stacks, and hold our hands and everything like that. I think it was the very first time I played cards live in Vegas. There was just, 4 or 5 times pots would have gone different ways if I had kind of like acted correctly or act more in sync with how the game was supposed to be. Like essentially not exactly string bets, but just doing things wrong, where people then basically the floor went a different way. A home game I could have argued a case in a different way, but the rules were the rules, and I learned something, and I lost pots or won pots, and things went different ways. And at the end of it, it basically kind of like soured my reputation on 1 or 2 of the card rooms I played in, because I thought, oh, I'm just being treated so poorly here. And that was just kind of how that experience went. So there was definitely a lot of things that I wish I would have known, read through this book before my first time playing live in Vegas. So Tommy even talks about basically kind of, he just talks a lot about this, and I don't want to spoil all the elements. I think there's a ton of important things. He talks a lot about like fantasy poker, which is his term for kind of how people chit chat on 6th Street later on in between. And, they say, oh, I was bluffing, they imply they had this hand or this and that. And a lot of it is just like table banter of people kind of lying, and you just realize so much of kind of the context of how to present yourself and how to play through these chapters. So I thought it was just really important. I thought this is really, really great to read through this, how to do showdowns correctly, how to just, how to handle a lot of the elements of poker. So to kind of wrap up all this, I'm kind of flying through this, but he moves a bit onto the online elements of poker, just kind of getting into what's important, what may not be. Online poker, we have the option to play more than one table. So he talks about, figuring out your earn basically from the best games available. Is it better to 10 table the hundreds or like 3 table the 500s? Things like that, how to figure stuff out like that. He talks about the chat box, and, I can be a great chatter or a horrible chatter. In his mind, the chat box is terrible. It can cause like finger slip and misclicks. It can cause, just other issues that are basically mistakes. And he says to cut it out. So that was kind of a revelation. I've definitely fat fingered a few things while chatting. You know, you hit enter and actually a bet window pops up, kind of thing like that, and then you find out you're cold four betting with like, you know, 8-4 off because you weren't really paying attention. You're trying to get a chat message in. He talks about sort of note taking, and you know, the other things that he talks about in online poker are just like the speed of the game and the location and kind of internet versus table. And there doesn't seem to be much, at least to this point in the book, that really covers kind of, you know, the elements of online poker. I'd say there's definitely a lot more modern elements. Maybe that's something that to think on and discuss in future chapters, or maybe some more stuff will get covered. But there definitely seems like there's more modern elements when playing online poker. There's different apps and sites. There's way more software. You know, Tommy has always kind of been, you know, the brick and mortar table poker person. So he's maybe not as familiar as most poker seems to be played online. At least, you know, the volume of hands is certainly put in online nowadays. So there's probably a lot more elements of poker to be studied and had online. And that's something to kind of think about as a discussion question that we can get into in the future. So this is covering up through chapter 9 or so. And next week, I'll finish up the rest of it. This is kind of just a quick at you of what the table poker elements were. And so thanks for watching.